So, first of all, I'd like to welcome and thank the fact that I'm here with David Maggs, who's the mission team leader for the Diocese of Bath and Wells. David, if you can wave or nod or otherwise make yourself known, that would be fantastic. Lovely. Thank you, David. We've also got Sarah Emmett on the call. She is the Assistant Environment Officer from the Diocese of Bath and Wells. So Sarah, if she's there, will wave. If she's not, you'll meet her later. Oh, there she is. Fabulous. Fabulous. And we're really pleased again to have Andrea Gilpin from Caring for God's Acre with us, which is really fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. She's going to be helping us along the way. And we're really pleased to have the support of Caring for God's Acre. So I'm here to talk to you this evening about getting to know your churchyard with wildlife in mind. And it's going to be all about really thinking about all the different ways you need to think about your churchyard when you're starting to think about wildlife. I wanted just to introduce, for those of you who might be new to the initiative, Wilder Churches is something we started in March. It's a joint initiative between the Diocese of Bath and Wells, which covers much of Somerset and parts of Avon and little bits around the area. And it's with Somerset Wildlife Trust. And we're really delighted to be working in this joint way to support communities to take action for wildlife. We really need people to take action for wildlife. And so it's really fantastic that we're able to work together in this way. What we're doing is we're running a programme of online training and support through these online sessions, which are open to anyone and everyone interested in their churchyard, in wildlife, or in both, ideally. So what we'll do is we're sort of hoping to help you to sort of get to know the existing wildlife value of your churchyard or other church land, to sort of care for and celebrate that churchyard, but also to then make space for nature where there are opportunities to do so and where it's right for the church and the community. It's also not all about the churchyard, it's also about just the things we do in our lives, in our communities, and increasing the decisions we make, I suppose, with nature in mind. I wanted to thank sort of everybody who's already got in touch about Wilder Churches and who has helped to spread the word. I'm really sort of delighted. I know Sarah and David and I, we've all just been absolutely bowled over by it. So thank you so much. And it is lovely to have so many of you here this evening, even if it wasn't quite as many as we wanted, but it's hopefully we'll get through these technical issues and we will carry on as we were. So I wanted to first talk about the things that we might need to ask ourselves as we're getting to know our churchyard, the church land, or the burial ground with wildlife in mind. I wanted at this early point to sort of mention that we will keep using the word churchyard, but it's not all about just about churchyards, it's about other church land, it's about all faiths, all areas where this might apply. I will just use the word churchyard to sort of cover those, but absolutely we're very much open to everyone in this initiative. So when sort of thinking about your churchyard, there are sort of different areas to consider really. The obvious things, if you think about wildlife, is, well, what animals does it support? What habitats are there? What plants might there already be living there? But it's got to not just be about the wildlife, it's got to really be about who cares for the churchyard, who really knows most about the churchyard, and how is that churchyard currently used by the community? How has it been used in the past? And what are the plans for its use in the future? I think it's really important to also think who might want to help and get involved. Management will be really key. That will be key for wildlife, and so it's also important to sort of understand who currently manages the churchyard, how it's managed, and who decides how it's managed really. And so it's sort of all these different areas that sort of all interlink, but are really important things to consider. I'd suggest that there are sort of several different ways to go about these, sort of getting the answers to these questions. First of all, talking to your church leader. We said in the last session, the first step will always be to sort of approach the church leader and talk to them about what you're interested in doing. It's also really important to talk to those people that currently look after the churchyard, and also to raise awareness in the community and ask other people to get in touch, because there'll be lots of people out there who already know a lot about the churchyard, and it's really important to get them involved from the start. I would also really advocate that you visit your churchyard regularly. I think that's a great way to get to know the wildlife that's living in your churchyard, but it's also a great way to see how it's being used by other people and get that understanding and potentially start those conversations with others in your community who value that churchyard. So what I would suggest, and I'll sort of keep coming back to, is the idea that it would be fantastic to create a map of your churchyard. It may already exist. It may well be that your church contact has a map of the churchyard and how it's managed. If you don't have one, you can sketch one. It's not about winning prizes for beauty. It's about just having a map that shows sort of key features of your churchyard. And I think this is a really useful visual way of gathering together the information that you need about your churchyard. I'd therefore recommend, once you have a map with the sort of the key features on, you make several copies, and then you use those to sort of start documenting the information you find along your sort of journey of information gathering about the churchyard. It will be really important to talk about how it's currently used, how it's currently valued by the community, what plans there might be in the future for its use, but also in order to plot out what management is currently what management is currently sort of being undertaken to look after the churchyard at the time. And of course also to document the habitats that there are there and the wildlife that you might find. So I wanted first of all to talk about the wildlife. This seems like a simple suggestion, but I would really recommend, if when you're thinking about your churchyard and helping wildlife, it's really important just to spend time in your churchyard looking at things. I think actually, if you sort of, often we move through these spaces in our communities and we don't necessarily have the time or sort of the right head frame to sort of notice what there might be going on around us, and deliberately going to your churchyard and spending some time there, noticing what wildlife you might see, what you might hear, what sort of things you might have walked past 100 of times but now see with new eyes. I would really recommend doing that. It's also really good for you. I think there's so much that's been shown about our well-being and how helpful it is to spend time sort of looking at, absorbing, connecting with nature. And I would really so it's good for you as well as putting together information. As someone who's spent a lot of time in my career wandering around places with, looking at things in a slightly, oh, what's she up to sort of way, it's a really good way to start conversations with people. People who care about the churchyard will wonder what you're doing. And people who care about wildlife will think, oh, is she looking at a bee? What's she, it will create these conversations. I can absolutely, I know that to be the case. It's certainly always been my experience. So yes, no, it's a fantastic way to start those conversations in your community as well. One thing I wanted to emphasise is how important getting to know the plants in the churchyard is, and the habitats that those plants together provide. It's really vital. It's a really vital step because it will help you to understand what wildlife your churchyard is currently likely to support. Sometimes from the plants you get a good idea of what creatures will be out there and using those habitats. But it's also going to be really vital to understand which actions to help wildlife could work best in your churchyard, which ones might work, which ones might not, and to really make sure that you know how to care for the existing wildlife that you have. I would really recommend that you visit regularly. The thing with nature, particularly at this time of year, is it keeps changing. Every week, new things will be appearing. New species will suddenly be visible that you hadn't really noticed before. And I really would recommend you repeat going to see your churchyard and looking to see what you can see. I also really wanted to emphasise that I'm very aware that I think it can sometimes be quite daunting to get to know wildlife, particularly plants. There are some people say, oh, but there are all these complicated sciencey Latin names and I don't understand them and I wouldn't know where to start. And I would say, well, don't let naming things put you off. Just having a look at what there is and getting a sense for how many different things there are is a really good place to start. You won't be able to identify everything you see straight away, but you'll start to notice things, and then you might be able to start to figure out what some of them might be as you go along, and it's a really important step, so don't be put off. There are some really fantastic resources out there that I want to recommend. You may all be already aware of various resources like these Field Studies Council. If you can see those, they do these fantastic fold-out charts, and they do them on pretty much everything. They do it on all the plants, they do them on the animals as well. And what's really helpful is they do it by habitats. So rather than thinking, I don't know what's in, I don't know where to start. I've got this big book of wildflowers and I wouldn't know where to start. It narrows it down for you. There is even one of these FSC guides for the wildlife burial ground, which has been produced with Caring for God's Acre. So that's a very useful one. And what I also love about these is they're relatively inexpensive. They cost between sort of £2.50 and £3.50. So they're not too hard on the purse either. However, there are also free resources. So there are lots of online sort of spotter sheets. For plant life, have some great ones. And we have Wildlife Watch as Wildlife Trusts, and it's aimed at children, and they have lots of activities, but some of those are spotter sheets, and it doesn't matter that they're aimed for children. They're jolly useful. They give you a really good, they sort of have them on different topics of hedgerow butterflies, or, you know, bees and different birds that you might find in different sort of environments. And so it can actually be a really good sort of place to start. I've also been recently getting to know the apps that are available. Increasingly, there are some new smartphone apps that essentially help you to identify things. So you can use your smartphone and you can take a picture of something, and it will use what is seen in the picture to determine what it is. I've been sort of talking with colleagues about which of these are good and which of these are less good. And one that seems to come out fairly well is Seek, which is produced by a company called iNaturalist. I've had a bit of a go with it. I tested it out on things that I knew to see whether it got them right. It got them right quite a lot of the time. And where it didn't get them right, it helped to really narrow it down to sort of where to look in the book, which I always think is most of the battle. Having a sense of where to start. Actually knowing it might be a speedwell is a really good place, because then you can go and look at speedwells, whereas actually if you're just going, well, it's a blue flower, I have no idea where to look, it really helps to narrow things down. It's not always right. It did misidentify something, but it also managed to identify things just from the leaves, which is marvellous, because that can be a really helpful thing, particularly in churchyards. So I would say it's worth a go. The other sort of book that I generally would recommend is called The Wildflower Key. This is an old version. There's a newer, whizzier version. It's by Frances Rose. It's more of a technical book. It's got sort of all the speedwells rather than just, you know, the most common ones. But if you start to get into things, it's a great book and a really useful resource. But it's not all about the plants, it's also about the wildlife. And again, the FSC have them on pretty much everything, including churchyard lichens. But on the animals front, they have bees, beetles, bugs, butterflies, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, everything you could think of really. So I would recommend those. Also, in the UK, we have a lot of conservation organisations who focus on particular species or species groups, and they almost always have a really good online resource to help you start to identify things. Butterfly conservation, you can basically choose it by size of butterfly, colour of butterfly, and it shows you the most likely options. It's really easy to use. The RSPB has information on how to recognise different bird songs of some of the common bird species. And there are all sorts of these type of resources online. Things like Seek also can be used for identifying things, and you can set a feature so it'll ignore the plants, because if you sort of chase a bee around, which I have tried to do, it just keeps telling you the plant it's on, and I think, well, I know that. But if you actually sort of, you can choose a setting so it focuses on the animal in question and helps you to identify those as well. But as ever, they're useful guides, but I would always say, check a book. If you've got an idea, if it's given you a name, you can Google it, see if you can find lots of more information about it and think, actually, yes, that is what I've got in front of me. But I think it's these apps, you know, they're slightly doing me out of a job, so a little bit suspicious, but it can really help, I think, to sort of narrow things down a bit and make it a bit more accessible. Although on the other side, I would always say, don't always walk around everywhere with a phone between you and nature. It's nice to actually have that looking at it sort of experience as well. So I would say it's a useful tool, but just see it that way. Another idea I thought could work really well, and particularly sort of for wilder churches, is to actually start a community wildlife list. You often see these in sort of nature reserves, sort of lists of birds and that kind of thing. But you can create a wildlife sightings list perhaps on your church notice board, or do a sort of chalkboard that people can add to. and start to record the wildlife, ask people to record what they see. You can do a similar thing online, and you can also sort of start to ask if there might be anyone in your community where they might have some ID skills that they'd be happy to sort of share and get involved. There's also the opportunity, and sort of with things like the Churches Count on Nature and Love Your Burial Ground Week, which means I would now like to hand over smoothly to Andrea from Caring for God's Acre, who will be talking about some of the resources that Caring for God's Acre have, but also about these two events, which could be a useful way of getting the community involved in recording your wildlife. So if I will hand over to you, Andrea, now able to unmute yourself, that would be marvellous. And I will move on to the next slide. Are you there, Andrea?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. Thank you so much.
Super duper. It's great. Well, hi, and I've just got a couple of minutes just to do a whistle-stop tour of a few of the resources that we've got that can help complement what this brilliant Wilder Churches project is doing. So next one, Pippa, please. Great, thank you. So first of all, we have an action pack. This can be purchased, or it's all free to download from our website. The pack is divided into 4 sections: managing churchyards and burial grounds, havens for wildlife, burial grounds through time, which is more about the social and the built heritage, and involving people. And it covers topics such as how to create a management brief for your site, grass cutting regimes, managing trees and shrubs, involving volunteers and surveying, that kind of thing. It's also complemented by mini films that we have on our website and some webinars that are free that we're running at the moment. Next slide, please, Pippa. Thank you. Next, we've got education pack. This is aimed at primary school children, and it covers many topics. And again, it's got activities and templates. It's linked to the national curriculum. It was written with us and teachers, so it's a very practical resource that teachers are using quite a lot. But it also can be used for messy church or open days and fates, because it's got a lot of resources in it. This covers topics ranging from monuments to mini beasts, so just all sorts of things that you'll find in your burial ground. It's got photographs, worksheets and templates, and again, it's free to download from our website. Next one, please, Pippa. As Pippa mentioned, we've got Love Your Burial Ground Week. This is a week that takes place in June, second week of June every year. And this year we have joined with A Rocha, the Church in Wales and the Church of England to do a Churches Count on Nature initiative, which is really trying to get people out and about, recording what they see in their burial ground and then sharing those records as well with the relevant local groups. So that's going on in June. Next one, please, Pippa. So these activities during that week can be self-led. So if you prefer not to actually organise an event due to the restrictions this year, then you could use some of these resources like leaf templates. We've got some spotters guides and all sorts of resources. We've got recording sheets and that kind of thing. You could leave them at your site on a particular day, invite people to come along and walk around your churchyard, spotting what they see, feeling inspired by whichever kind of template they want to, or just leave some magnifying glasses and get people to go around. So you can make the event as socially distanced as you want, and make it self-led if that's what you feel is more appropriate for your site. Thank you. So far about over 200 groups have registered, and again, you just need to register on our website if you want us to publicise your event and it be listed. Thank you. Yeah, next one, please. Thanks. We've also got a starter guide and a botanical companion. So the starter guide, which is on the top left, top left, and that's quite a chunky kind of flip book. We've just we can send you up to 6 copies for free of that. We've just run out soon, but we've just done a print run because we've had massive. We've given out sort of 500, which was probably due to be the whole life of our project, but it ran out in a few weeks due to increased demand. So I would get your name down, because once this lot's gone, we probably will have to call it a day, because we're self-funding it. But we will get a print run, so do get involved with that. Try and get that. That would be really useful. And then on the bottom left, we've got the burial ground companion, and that basically is to do with the grassland on your site and identifying the flowers. And it, again, like Pippa said, you don't have to worry that you don't know all the species names. It actually also encourages you to count the different leaf shapes you find in your piece of turf, so that you can identify if it's species rich or not just by the leaf shapes. And there's a little table you can fill in. On that, we've also got a frequently seen species list at the back of that, so you could just go along and just tick which ones you see. It's quite satisfying, because most of us know a bramble, a nettle, a dandelion, forget-me-not, and it's amazing how much we do know that we don't realise we know. But when you're going around a burial ground, you're relaxed, you're listening to the birds, and you look through this list, you think, oh yeah, I know that and that. So that might be a nice thing. Again, free to download from our website. But you've also obviously got the Somerset Botany group, and I'm sure they've got some fantastic resources that are very specific to Somerset. And I think Val's coming up next, so I'll hand over there.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, and I would echo the fantastic resource that is available to download as well. Particularly, there's the Visit, Record, Enjoy. I think has a lovely sort of selection of some of the key plants that you're likely to see. So yeah, absolutely, that would be fantastic. So I'm just going to hand on now. So I want to talk to you next about Somerset Botany Group. So as I mentioned in the last session, we're really delighted that Somerset Botany Group have offered to help communities get to know their wildlife in their churchyards, and I'm going to hand over to Val Graham now from the Botany Group, who's just going to tell you a little bit more about it. Thank you, Val.
Okay.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Val. You go for it. Thank you.
That's good. Okay, so we're a voluntary group that's been around for over 30 years, I think. I've only been involved for the last 8 years or so. We are independent, although we do a lot of work for the Wildlife Trust, Natural England, RSPB, various other people, broadly for land managers who are interested in their biodiversity. So we go and we tell them really what plants they've got and in what quantities. More generally, we want to encourage appreciation of wild plants. And obviously we're involved in this project because we recognise churchyards are a valuable habitat, sometimes really, really good habitats. So the idea, I guess, in the next year or two is to tell people what they've already got in many ways, and to point out the benefits of plant diversity in terms of your birds, your bats, your butterflies, and all the other pretty things that all rely on the plants. Last year, I was lucky enough to go to St Mary's at Kent and Mandeville, met Sandra Cook there, who I think is on the call, because she has been letting part of the churchyard grow. And as you can see, we have lots of flowers. This was in August. This is quite late season, really. You can see the brown at the back. Some of the flowers have gone over. They're starting to seed, and in the foreground, you've got lots and lots of bird's foot trefoil, which is very pretty. Can I have the next slide, please? And these are just a few of the photos I took on the day. So on the right, we've got a pyramidal orchid. In the middle, we've got bird's foot trefoil and lady's bedstraw. And on the left, we've got selfeel, which were all there in large numbers. They're all there, in fact, in the mown part, but they didn't get a chance to flower. So that just really illustrates what a difference pausing mowing can make, I think. And we'd be happy to come out and see your churchyards and provide you with a species list and all the rest of it. And I think that's all I'm going to say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Val. And yes, and we're so pleased to have the Botany Group sort of support. I think it's really brilliant. It's, you know, a ready-made network of people with botany skills who are able to sort of help communities get to know the wildlife they have in their churchyards. So we're really pleased you've joined us. Thank you. Yeah, and so just to sort of summarise, if you are interested in having a sort of the Botany Group come and survey, then you can just do so by contacting me, drop me an email, say that's what you'd like. I'll send you a really simple form to give you the key details that you need. We'd need to basically, all the details we'd need to hand on to the Botany Group. The all-important map, again, a map would be really useful because this provides something for the surveyor to sort of annotate and get to know sort of what's where and start to map those habitats. And then Chris Billinghurst, who is also on the call from Somerset Botany Group, she's there somewhere, I think. I can't see her at the moment, but I know she's there. So yeah, she'll be sort of coordinating things, and they'll be able to coordinate with you about having a sort of a Somerset Botany Group member come to sort of survey the churchyard. One option where both the Somerset Botany Group member and yourself, if you wanted to, and you were both keen, it could be potentially the chance to meet in a socially distanced way at the churchyard on the day of the survey, so that actually the Botany Group member can show you some of the things you have in your churchyard. I think that would be great, but equally it has to be all within everyone's comfort zone. So that's another thing that we will be asking. The other thing to sort of mention is about mowing times, and obviously mowing can have quite an impact on the ability to identify things. It can make it somewhat more tricky at times, so certainly coordinating with when sort of, if you're expecting regular mowing to happen, making sure that it's as far away from when it's being cut for when the visit is planned would be really helpful. That takes me to a slide which I'm slightly cautious in sharing, really, but it's something I wanted to sort of talk to you all about, because there will be the opportunity in some cases this year for communities to potentially test out this, to see what flowers they might have in turf that is currently mown short on a regular basis, in order to see what those wildflowers might be that are sort of hidden from view, as it were. So in some situations it could be useful to create a small test plot which you allow to grow tall without mowing between mid-May at the latest, I'd say, you know, any time from pretty much now until mid-May, you know, to stop cutting, and then cut again mid-July at the earliest, and no later than perhaps the end of August, but if it's a really dry year, much sooner than that. I would say if you were going to do this, it would be to do this where it is simple to do so, and I shall talk more about that in a moment, but also to make sure that it's really clear that this is a small test plot. Mark the area clearly in a nice, attractive, sympathetic way, and display a sign explaining exactly what you're doing. So you're just you want to see what wildflowers there might be growing in the turf, and so you're just going to sort of test that out to see what can grow over the summer. Explain why you're doing it, who's involved, that ensure that, you know, flag that you've spoken to the church leader and they're aware of it and supportive, and talk about why you're doing it. And also plan ahead. If you are going to have a small test plot that isn't going to be mown, it will be taller by the end of the summer, and it might potentially even need different machinery to cut it. It might not. It might be that your normal machinery will cope fine, but it's something to really consider to ensure that there is a way to cut it. If it's a really small plot, shears. I've been known to use shears in a similar manner on this sort of situation, but it's harder work than you'd imagine. Even on just like a little a metre square is quite exhausting. So, but just plan ahead with that. But I say in bold where it is simple to do so, and I sort of really want to sort of emphasise that it's a great thing to do if it's all within your own sort of management and your community. You've already been talking to each other about this kind of thing for ages, and it's something you've wanted to test out. It's something you can manage. It's simple to do. You know, it wouldn't, and certainly that there are no concerns with it in the community. It's a great thing to do if it's possible, but where it's going to be complicated, perhaps if it's a closed churchyard, particularly, that's going to be more complicated because the management may well be with the local authority. If it's with a contractor who would then have to coordinate things, or you're not sure how you'd cut it at the end of the summer, or if anybody, you know, if the community aren't already aware, I think it's a great thing to do, but equally you don't want to sort of concern people by not sort of having spoken to the community about it first. So it's better to take your time and ensure the community is aware and is supportive. And if it's not the right moment, well, there's next year. And actually, there's an awful lot you can tell from the turf, from the leaves, from the number of different leaves you have in the short turf. If Somerset Botany Group come and survey, I'm sure they would prefer it if everything was beautifully in flower. But many members will also be able to identify things from the leaves. And even the app that I've been testing out could identify some things from the leaves. So it's not essential, but I wanted to mention it because it is something that can be helpful to sort of get a better feel, particularly for the community to be able to see what is potentially there in that sort of small way, but with caution. But as you find things, share these things with people. Update people in your parish newsletter, put something on the notice board. If you've got your sightings list, that might well be doing its job for you. one thing that can work really nicely and could tie in nicely if you did want to do a sort of socially distanced, low-key sort of count on nature sort of initiative is just to sort of, if it's dry, put little signs around the churchyard pointing out, you know, little plants that you've noticed or things that people could see that people can actually just explore for themselves. And it's temporary, you put it up, you take it down a couple of days later, but it can be a really nice way to, for people to happen upon things without realizing. Share photos online. I think there's all sorts of ways we've got these days to share the type of things we're finding. And update your map. So yes, I would say as you pull together this information on what wildlife you have, which is so essential, it's such an important part of this whole process, is to understand what you've already got. Start to map what you've already got. If Somerset Botany Group have been, then obviously they will provide you with a map, well, with your map, but they'll have annotated it with what they've found. But equally, this is something you can do. And if other people have said to you, oh, you know, I've noticed this, that, and the other, you can add that to the map. Potentially, you might hear from people about, oh, well, actually, in the autumn, there are amazing wax cap fungi here. And that's the kind of thing that you might otherwise overlook over the summer. So mark those type of things on as well. That's really useful information. Excuse me. So that's sort of from the wildlife point of view, everything that you sort of could start to sort of look into. But as I mentioned at the start, it's also really important to think about some of the key information that you need to find out about your churchyard, your churchland, or your burial ground. It's about the current management. The past management can also be really useful. It can give you some useful information about what may still be supported sort of in certain areas. It's really important to understand how it's currently used, how it's been used in the past, but also how it may well be used, different areas might be used in the future, and how it's valued by the community. As I said earlier on in the talk, you know, talking to the church leader is really key. And I would also suggest you talk to those who currently look after the churchyard. I would just clarify here on the where you have a closed churchyard, where it is in the management of the local authority. Last time we sort of spoke about local authorities and closed churchyards, and Sarah and David and I have since been meeting with several of the districts, and they're in slightly different positions because of the nature of how these things work. Some have sort of external contractors, some are doing it in-house, and they're sort of looking into various things, and we're sort of talking to them. So what I would suggest is, if you, at this stage, don't contact your local authority about what they're currently doing, because local authorities at the moment, a lot of their time has been diverted to the vaccination programme, so they're pretty busy. But what we're trying to do, David, Sarah and I, is to have these sort of wider district level discussions and sort of see what can be possible on that district level. So if you contact me and Sarah instead, then we can sort of update you with where things are for the district. But sort of at the moment, it's best to sort of, it's not the right moment, I suppose, for contacting the local authority. So that would be the one note of caution on that. But in every other situation, you know, particularly if it's your church warden or a local person who's cut it for years, you know, that's the person to be speaking to. Again, talk to everyone in the community, ask people to get in touch to help you gather some of this information, and visit your churchyard regularly. Now I want to hand on to Sarah Emmett from the Diocese. Sarah, and you're going to talk about who's who in your church, I believe.
I am, yes. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to give a very quick run through of the people that you may need to be in touch with in your church. I apologise to anyone who is in these roles that I am giving just the highlights of your role, and I know that I'm going to be missing out on an awful lot of the wonderful work you're doing. So please feel free to gloss over that one for me. Okay, so I'll start with the vicar. Obviously, the vicar is in charge of matters of faith. And the vicar is the chair of the PCC, of which the parochial church council below, which I'll come back to. And when they're in role, they are also responsible for the building and grounds of the church. So that's why it's really, really important that you get in touch with them if you have a vicar or an incumbent. And I will come on in a minute to the next slide as to how you can get in touch with them. If you don't have a vicar or an incumbent, or you are already in touch with the church wardens, they're also a good place to start. The church wardens support the vicar, the minister, in their work, and they're also on the PCC. They are very important and very busy. and responsible for ensuring that the maintenance and that things that need to happen in the church get done in a timely fashion. And they also help with events and running events, which is a big part of the role of the church wardens I've been familiar with, and are responsible for the contents of the building. And I hope I've got that right. So that's my experience of church wardens. The PCC itself is made up of both lay people and the ex officio members that we just mentioned, and they are elected. And the number of PCC members is directly related to the amount of people on the electoral roll of the church. So they discuss all matters that the Church of England and our diocese bring up, and matters of the parish. They usually have a special section for buildings and grounds, so talking about more practical matters and maintenance. They also support the minister in their role. And as I said, the minister or vicar is, sorry, I keep using different names for that. I'll stick with vicar. Usually chairs the PCC when there is one. They approve events, and they would be needing to be aware of events that are happening in the churchyard. So actually, if you contact your church warden or your vicar, they may ask you to write something up for the PCC just to explain what's happening, so that they can be aware and offer any guidance. And the Diocesan Advisory Committee is the diocesan group that actually advises. It's full of specialists from various capacities. So we have building specialists and heating and energy specialists on there, etc. And these specialists offer advice to the whole diocese. You can find a lot of that information on our websites, but they would be the people that you would need to contact for certain permissions to make changes to the building or the land, which David's going to come on to in a minute, so I won't go there. But that's the people that you would go to for the wonderful world of faculty. And I think that's it for that slide. Thank you, Pippa. Oh, and actually what I did forget on that slide whilst we're there, but that's okay, I didn't put it on there, was that you can also contact the parish administrator as well. And most parishes will have an administrator, and they're also a really good place to start if you are finding it hard to contact any of those. Sorry, Pippa, carry on, thank you. So finding that right person, as I said, if you know somebody in a church already or you're part of a church, you'll probably already know who to talk to. But if you're not, or you're not sure where to start, the parish notice board in the churchyard or in the narthex of the church as you go in, I hope I've got the anatomical part correct there of the church, would give you the information you need. A lot of our churches also have websites, and if you need to know, or you're finding it hard to find your church website, there's a fantastic website called A Church Near You that you can just type in a postcode, a church name or where you live, and find a church near you. There's also maps on there, which is really helpful. And there's a diocesan contact list on our website, which tells you all of the people that you can get in touch with at the Diocese of Bath and Wells, and their role. And it also has a list of our clergy and our area deans and everyone on there. And lastly, if you're having any trouble finding the person that you need to talk to, please ask me and I will see what I can do to find that person for you, or to forward you your question to the right person. So do please email me, and thank you for everyone who's been in touch. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear everything that you're doing and to hear the enthusiasm. So do please stay in touch. And now next slide, please, Pippa. I'm just going to pass over to Eileen from Chew Magna, from St Andrew's Church in Chew Magna, who has already done a lot of the Wilder Church's activities, and is actually just going to give us a couple of minutes on her experience of starting on the Wilder Church's journey, if she's there.
I am. Can you hear me?
Hello, Eileen. Thank you. I shall hand over to you.
Oh, hello. Jackie Morgan and myself in Chew Magna started a community project called Rewild Chew, and it was to try and encourage gardeners to increase the biodiversity and the wildlife in their garden, and to link up to create wildlife corridors. And obviously what it would end up focusing on is the centre of the village is the churchyard. So we contacted the church wardens because we don't have a vicar at the moment, although I think we're about to have one appointed. And we started looking, I think probably last summer, to see what we had got in the churchyard. And this slide shows we've got some species rich turf, as you can see on the left, with fox and cubs. We've got primroses. So we contacted the church wardens, who were amenable to giving us some of the areas. We were very fortunate into having a botanist in the village who has started doing a survey this spring for us. And what we've done is we put up a notice saying that we're part of the Wilder Churches. We contacted yourselves to talk about becoming an eco church. So we publicised that and we put it into the parish mag. And to date, we have been splitting and moving primroses, which you can see in the photograph there. We've got some of the community involved, so we've been able to get oxeye daisies and further primroses. And so at the moment, that's what we're up to. But I think we would be very interested in the June God's Acre Love Your Burial Week, because I think that will just raise further awareness. So at this stage, we've just taken over a couple of areas, as you were saying, just to see how we get on, and to see really how the community react to it. I don't think there's anything else to add, unless Jackie is there and wants to add anything that I've missed. Don't know that she is. I think that's it then from us, Sarah.
Thank you, Eileen. That's fantastic, and it's really good to hear from somebody who's ahead of us on this journey. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. Pippa, would you kindly change the slides? Thank you very much. So I've just done, I'm afraid my computer skills are not quite as advanced as Pippa's when it comes to her slides, but I was just having a bit of a mind mapping session, just when we're thinking about starting contacting people and the kind of information that we need to collect. This was just a prompt really for thinking about the big picture of what we use our churchyards for. And I'm sure that you've got your own words to add to that as well. I just wanted to offer a bit of the range here. Obviously, we are focusing a lot on the heritage and the ecology and the conservation. But as Pippa has said, that we've also got the education aspect. And for a lot of people, there is sacred aspect as well, and the peaceful and contemplation aspect. There is something very unique about our churchyards, and we're just encouraging everybody just to take a few minutes when they are planning who to talk to and what questions to ask, to think about all the ways in which the churchyards are used and how we can respect all of those in what we're doing. And actually, I will just pass over now to David, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the permissions that might be needed, that follows on from the contacts. So David, are you there? You are, great.
Good evening, everyone. Good to be with you. I just want to, we've had several questions in the first two sessions that we've run, and particularly from last time, about various things. And tonight we are not going to go into the full detail about what permission is required for what thing, but we thought we would try and deal with a couple of headline things. So firstly, in general, the management of a churchyard to provide habitat for wildlife normally falls within the scope in Church of England terms of routine maintenance. So there's no faculty, that's our word for permission, is required for those kind of things. So when you start doing one of those plots of, the test plots, for example, or anything like that, which is just part of the normal maintenance and an overall run of the churchyard, you don't have to think about permission. So that's a general helpful thing, which I think gives a lot of scope for the imagination. hopefully. But we were asked on the first and I think on the second call about bird and bat boxes, and I'll give you the sort of story to date, and it's probably an evolving story which I'll mention in a minute. So firstly, if you want to put bird or bat boxes onto trees or anything on churchyard walls, so that's the perimeter, normally the perimeter wall, no permission is required. On church buildings, if you want to put bat boxes up, no permission is required if that is seen to be part of a bat management plan. And the encouragement of bats is a bat management plan, so that is hopefully helpful. With birds, currently you do need permission for bird boxes. You do need to get permission for a bird box to be put onto a church, but we have had a really helpful response from the person who's called the Chancellor of the Diocese, who is actually like the legal expert on these matters, and he's willing to work with us to develop a list of things that you guys, as you develop your management plans and your ideas for your churches, want to see happen, and then we'll get a sort of collective mission that's going forward. It's called an additional materials order. I think that's what it's called. It's additional something. I haven't got it in front of me at the moment now. And that, I think that's really positive. So it'd be really good as you know, tonight it's first about seeing what you've got and working with Somerset Botany and other groups and other people who can help you with that. That's the first thing. But then it's the next stage is as Pippa's been saying, about thinking about your plans and what you're going to do. And then the third thing I'm going to talk about tonight is planting trees, which is that is a subject in itself, and we will make available the detail. We'll send you a link when we send out the sort of follow-up email for the detailed guidance about trees. And we're not focusing on, there are lots of issues around tree maintenance, permissions around certain types of trees and all that kind of thing. You need to see the detail of that, so we're not going to cover that at all tonight. But some people were asking about planting new trees, and the simplest thing to say just for this evening is there is another person that in addition to the people that Sarah has talked about, who is not local to your community normally, because there's only 3 of them in the whole diocese, and that is the Archdeacon. They have a special role in the system because the system has been improved since 2016. It's not as complicated and cumbersome as it used to be. It is a much better system. So there's now a list of things which don't require permission at all, and some things which only require the permission of the Archdeacon, and that includes the planting of new trees. However, having said that, there are some things to think about. We would again be strongly recommending that trees aren't just put in willy-nilly. They are part of your overall churchyard plan that you might be thinking ahead for like 2 or 3 years ahead. You have to think about future needs in a churchyard, things like future needs for burials, or where you might want to open up land for a burial extension and things like that. There's also details around not putting them obviously near the building or near a neighbouring building. Some churches where I grew up, we literally had a cottage right next to the church and things like that, so you don't want to go there. But there's also certain limits on where you might put them in terms of overshading areas, so that things like lichen can't grow and things like that. So there's a lot more detail there that we will be publishing and letting you have. But just to give you that key sense that if you were looking at planting new trees, which I know is popular in terms of the is obviously what Sarah and I are both about, the environmental agenda and climate change, then there is that requirement to definitely get permission before you do any of those, and it's to the level of Archdeacon that's needed. So I hope that's all right for now. And just to sort of make a general apology, we've just been moving our website from, we've just created a new website basically as a diocese, and some of the things that were on the old one haven't yet transferred, and that does include some of the details which it was traditionally under the Diocesan Advisory Committee, which Sarah mentioned, and if you give us a little while, we'll try to improve that. There is a huge amount available on the national church sites, and we will tend to, I think, to often point you towards them as well. The Churches Building Council is where a lot of this information can be found. So I hope that's okay for now. Please do put in the chat further issues you've got about what needs permission and that kind of thing, because we can still deal with them, but we won't. That's the level we're going to work at tonight. So I've just talked about bird and bat boxes and about planting new trees. There are lots of other issues, but that general good news is that a lot of the things that you might have in mind with rewilding is that do not require any permission, because they're seen as just the way your community is choosing to manage its churchyard. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. And I think it's, I think we all do a picture of that's the whole point of this sort of time, is to take time to get to know your churchyard in terms of all those future uses, understanding these permissions. And it's something that we hope to sort of be supporting you on more. In the next session, as I'll come on to at the end, we'll be focused more on about the sort of actions and what you might do where. And likewise with planting trees, there's lots, obviously we need to plant trees, and we really need to plant lots of trees, but where you plant them is really important. And it's, churchyards potentially support sort of quite species rich grassland, and so that's not a good place to plant a tree in that situation. So but that's what we hope to do through this training, is to provide sort of filling in all those answers, I suppose, so that it's then possible to look at your churchyard and understand what option will work best where, from all the points of view, from the church, from the community, and for wildlife. So yeah, just to sort of build on sort of what's been said there, and thank you to everyone for contributing, and really lovely to hear from Eileen, I thought, there as well, to sort of hear that first-hand experience of being able to sort of get things started in the community. Establishing existing management is a really key point, and it will really vary from churchyard to churchyard. So there's no sort of one size fits all. It could be something that is arranged or undertaken by the church warden. It could be a contractor that sort of undertakes the work for the church, or the PCC. As I've already touched on in closed churchyards, it could be the local authority, and that could be whether the district council or the parish council. As I've said, we are in discussions with local authorities, so we'll be sort of hoping to again have a sort of district sort of approach to things, and that's certainly something that again we're working on. But you can in the meantime be busy sort of collecting all the information about the wildlife and everything else about how the churchyard is valued, really. Some closed churchyards are managed by other organisations or by volunteers, and some open churchyards are managed by volunteers. There's all sorts of different arrangements, and it may be that different areas may be managed by different people, and it's really useful to understand that as well, and to include that in your map. So one of the key questions, if you are able to, with closed churchyards and local authorities, I would hold off on sort of approaching them at this time, but where else, where it is possible, talk to whoever is currently managing the churchyard and find out what do they currently do, who does it, when do they do it, it might, whether this is mowing, whether this is trimming the hedges, whether this is sort of tree maintenance, all the different there'll be so many different operations to looking after your churchyard, and it's really important to understand what happens when, and how often things are done. So if it's mown, how regularly it's mown, and what sort of equipment is used, and as well as what equipment is currently used, it's really useful, I think, to have a chat about what that equipment could also do. If you did have ideas, we're moving forward, we're hoping to sort of find ways that you might be able to increase value for wildlife in churchyards, and that might mean slightly different operations or different ways of doing things. So understanding what equipment is available is really helpful, because that's a really important factor that everyone will have to sort of take into account, really. Which brings me on to just a quick point about grassland areas. Obviously, we talk about grasslands an awful lot because they can be such important habitats in churchyards. And I was very conscious that in the last session, there was a question from somebody that we didn't get a chance to answer, that I only saw sort of after the event, about, well, why do you need to cut? If you're letting sort of grasslands grow lovely over the summer and all the flowers and everything, why do you cut them at the end? Why not just leave them? And I think it's one of these things with grasslands. It's a bit counterintuitive. I think often we think if we leave nature to do its thing, a wildflower meadow appears. But actually, it's wildflower meadows are often a very sort of managed system. At the moment, they in the wider countryside, they are managed by taking a cut of hay at the end of the summer, and they are then grazed in the autumn and in the spring. The reason it's really sort of important to cut grassland areas is that if you don't, they stop being grassland areas. Over time, they will become scrub areas, and those scrub areas will then again, over time, become woodland areas. That's sort of the flow of nature, really. But having a mosaic of habitats, including grasslands, provides habitat for far wider range and diversity of wildlife. And our grasslands, we've lost so much of our grasslands. We've lost 98% of our wildflower grasslands. So those bits that we have left, including in churchyards, are really so precious, because they are helping to just some of our wildlife to hang on in there, really, while hopefully the rest of the countryside we can sort of help to make a bit more nature friendly. By cutting, what you do basically is you take all the material away, which means you take nutrients out of the system. Wildflowers thrive in low nutrient conditions. If you leave everything growing tall and then you cut it, you're taking nutrients out of the system. If you let it drop, or you let it sort of mulch to the ground as you cut, that then rots down and it returns nutrients to the system. Letting it grow tall and then cutting it also provides a great sort of bed for the seeds to then re-establish and germinate for the following year. It also prevents some of the grasses from really getting hold, and it will stop things like bramble invading, and then little bits of hawthorn, and then the old ash seedling appearing. All that will happen if you sort of stop that annual cut. So removing the cuttings is important to keep the nutrients down, and that's sort of how you maintain wildflower meadow areas. But that's not the only solution, and that's not the only valuable thing for wildlife you can do in a churchyard. Regularly mown grass and turf, it can support wildflowers that don't have a chance to flower and set seed, which isn't so great for pollinators. But if there's a little bit of a window in how often they're done, actually you get a lovely flush of flowers. Flowers given half a chance will quickly produce the flowers as quickly as they can. And so maybe just sort of having a bit more of a window between mows can really help with that. Also, some of our wax cap fungi really, they thrive in having that sort of short grass, particularly in the autumn. And so there are, different parts of the churchyard can support different things. Likewise, tussocky grassland, where it is cut a little less often and it gets a bit more grassy and a bit more tussocky, is fantastic habitat for reptiles and invertebrates and for small mammals, which then helps the barn owls and everything. So it's all part of this thing. So I just wanted to sort of touch on that, because I think it underpins a lot of what we're thinking about when we're trying to get to know our churchyards. But there'll be more session on all of that, and more detail on all of that in the next session. So once you've gathered this information on management, please update your map. You'll notice the theme here. Who does what? When do they do it? What do they use? And really think about sort of any plan changes in management. What you see now might be temporary, and it might be that there's something else sort of planned, and it's really important to include those on your map. So finally, but by no means least, it's really essential to work out how your community currently use and how they currently value the churchyard. As Sarah's already touched on, it's sort of outlined that a churchyard has so many different uses for people and is valued by people in so many different ways. So it's really important to get a feel for that. Talk to the church leader, raise awareness in your community, and ask people to get in touch. Listen to what people say, even if you disagree. It's really important to understand how other people feel about the churchyard and what they value in it, and use it as an opportunity to get people involved from the start. And really, by listening to what they have to say and incorporating that, it's far more likely to be successful. So ways you might go about raising awareness, there's sort of the obvious things of maybe writing an article for your parish newsletter, or some stuff on social media. Posters, we've produced a template of a poster here. The yellow is where you'll change it for your community names. It's not quite as shouty as it looks, but a sort of generic poster to sort of help to raise awareness in your local area and get people involved. But maybe you also approach some of the local groups that might be interested, the gardening group or the natural history group or the WI or the Scouts. There'll be lots of people who might already be interested in helping. Again, as I said, things like wildlife sightings lists, that kind of thing, getting people to help you get to know the wildlife, joining in with that might be a really good way to get them involved in sort of doing something in your community. And although this is one has had its difficulties, I would recommend running online Zoom meetings and events. It's a great way to reach a lot of people at once in your community, and of course it can be done sort of very safely and without sort of consideration. We've been quite mindful about not suggesting you necessarily arrange community events. Obviously, we're all living in these strange times, and we would obviously emphasise that you always sort of do things within guidelines, but also within your own feeling of what you feel like doing, really. And I think there are so many ways that you could do things without necessarily having a sort of public event. Churchyards do offer the opportunity for distant, small sort of gatherings, but if that, you know, there are lots of other things you can do, and things like the wildlife sightings lists or other things. There's lots of ways you can do things that don't have to sort of do things at your own pace, basically do things at your own pace. I wouldn't be at one of my events without mentioning the 5 C's. And I keep emphasising these churchyards are really special places. And, you know, when you're working with communities and churchyards, it's so important to think about the importance of these spaces to people. So consider people, consult your community, communicate what you're doing, cooperate, work with each other, and compromise will be absolutely essential. Make sure everyone feels included and be flexible. If you've got something that you want to do, but actually all the evidence is saying that that's not really what the community wants, or it's not really what's going to work for wildlife, or it's not going to quite work right for the church, then change your plans. There will be something you can do, and that flexibility, I think, is really important. So I would really encourage you all to be led both by your community and by nature, instead of working out what's best. And what we hope through this sort of programme is to enable you to do that, give you all the information that you need to then put together a really fantastic plan for your churchyard. So a bit of a theme: update your map. Once you've understood how your community uses and values the churchyard, it might be practical things that people physically do in certain parts of the churchyard, or it might be the fact that everybody really loves the daffodils that appear in a certain bit every year, you know, and that's really important. Mark those things on, and that will help to bring together your picture of your churchyard and how it's everything about it that you need to consider, really. One thing that we mentioned in the last session was about being a Wilder Churches champion, and a few people have sort of asked for a bit more information on what that could be. I'm aware that time is marching on, so I will quickly run through this. Essentially, it's just having someone that's both Sarah and I can contact and know that there's a sort of point of contact in your community. But what's also really useful is that people in your community know who to contact in your community. At the moment, we have a strange situation where there might be several of you in one community who are all interested, but might not know each other as all interested. And it's sort of, if one of you is able to say, oh, I'm happy to be the contact, that can be really helpful. We would suggest sort of consider setting up a separate email address so that you sort of keep your own personal email address sort of separate from it, just to sort of look after your sort of your personal side of things as well. But it's essentially just somebody to sort of start things happening. The person who, you know, you might go and speak to the church leader and help spread the word. And you might start to form a bit of a Wilder Churches group for your community. And that might be 2 of you to start with, but that's how things start. They start small and they grow. And so that's sort of what we had in mind for Wilder Churches champion. But we also want to say there's no particular expectation or commitment for you to do anything. And it's really, we want this to be something that you want to do and you enjoy doing. So again, we would encourage, you know, doing things within your own capacity and at the right pace for you and for your community. I've had a few people get in touch to say they really want to do this, but there's a few things in their community that they need to be sensitive of. And is it all right with them? You know, it might take them a bit of time, and I really welcome that, because I know that that's someone who's thinking about the community and thinking about what can work. And so absolutely working at the pace for your community is really fantastic, I would say. But if you don't want to be a Wilder Churches champion, that's fine too. There are lots of ways you can join in with others in your community. But if you are interested, then Sarah and I would love to hear from you. So we will have another session that will hopefully run a teeny bit smoother than this one. And that will be on the 30th of June, which is again a Wednesday evening. And this is where we're going to come together again to hopefully start to sort of talk about, hopefully you'll already have been starting to share some of your wildlife discoveries. And we'll be talking more about that and how you can get others involved in your community through sort of inspiring them with what you've found. But also starting to think ahead to how you might consult your community about what they might like to see in the churchyard. And also to start to think more sort of practically about some of the potential actions for wildlife that could work, which options work best where, what other communities have done. We've heard so many fantastic stories, actually. It's been really inspiring hearing from people who have already been doing some fantastic things in their churchyards for wildlife. And actually it would be great if we can involve some of them as well in that. So hopefully we'll have some Somerset and Diocese sort of examples to share with you. So that will be the sort of the focus of the next session. As I mentioned last time, this is a regular programme of support. So after the June session, we hope that there'll be another one a little while later. We haven't put a date in the diary yet, but the intention is there. And these are going to be sort of regular events, providing you with the support that you need. We've started a Wilder Churches resources sort of section of our webpage. So when you go to the Wilder Churches website, you will now be able to find some of the sort of ID guides that I mentioned earlier, sort of that you might find with other organisations, but also those templates. So templates for posters that you might use in your village to start to raise awareness of what you're wanting to do. And we hope to be adding to that as time goes on, sort of provide you with the resources you need. So do let us know if there are other things you need. Top of my list at the moment is some text for a sort of example text for a sort of newsletter, sort of update for your parish newsletter. I would say that these things are only templates and you can write your own thing entirely, that's great. But if it helps, then do of course use them. Generally, the programme is here for all round encouragement and celebration of everything you're doing, and to support you on each step along this process, because it is a process, at finding something that's going to work for wildlife and for the community and the church. I think I had this slide last time. I guess what I'm sort of just saying on here is that this is a really important time for getting to know all these things. This information gathering stage can feel a bit sort of, oh, but we're not doing anything yet. But that's how it should be. It's so important to understand the wildlife you already have. It's so important to engage the community, and it's so important to understand what might not be possible practically for your churchyard, and to sort of get an understanding of that. So please take the time over the spring and summer to enjoy your churchyard and discover these things about it. And then hopefully as the programme continues, you'll then be in a really good position to start to come up with a plan of what you might want to do in your churchyard and how that might work. As ever, please act safely within the guidelines at all times. But yes, and we will be supporting you with each step along the way, really. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience. Apologies that we did have some technical issues at the start. It's never what we hope for with these things. So I really appreciate that you were so smiley and sent me nice messages on the chat and everything that you did. So thank you for that. If you want to get in touch, you've got all of our emails there. And you will have my email. Well, it's pretty much everywhere anyway, and we'll probably put it in the chat as well, I should think. I think I might just hand back over to David now, just for, did you want to say something, David?
Yes, thank you, Pippa. I mean, thank you again for your positive response tonight, so many of you being here, and we've got quite a lot of questions come in. We'll be dealing with in a few minutes, in a few remaining minutes. I think one of the most important things to draw out from those is the fact that a lot of people are wanting to not do this on their own, because I think a lot of you are probably just maybe individuals that are starting to think about this journey, and there's a request that you have people who are near to you and be in contact with them. And so Brian has already replied to that. We are looking into that and saying we will try and find a way of sort of sharing who's where, so that you can actually join up locally, because I think that initially that may be a way of really supporting you, each of you locally, where you need some support. And already some things have been happening in the chat where people have been making requests and have got responses already, so that's a really positive thing. We don't want to overdo the permission thing and all the things that Sarah has talked about this morning, but particularly this evening, sorry, what time of day is it? But I think the Chumagna story, just to remind you that both Jackie and Eileen were not members of the church. They were asking the church to engage with them, and that's, I think, what's so good about that Chumagna story, that it is possible. It shows you that going about it in the right way, taking it, I think, overall the message tonight is take it fairly slowly, and I hope you don't get frustrated with this. I think just to let you know that I was only on one of the conversations with local authorities, but it was just overwhelmingly positive with the Somerset West and Thornton person, that they want to help us with the closed churchyards issues, which a number of you address, and a lot of the clergy on the first call we had with them we're also talking about. So we are going to get through some of these strategic issues, and I hope that's positive for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And yes, so just to remind everybody that we've got the next session on the 30th of June, but I'm very conscious that I realise we sort of essentially started late, so we haven't got much time for questions now. But I mean, I can stay on for a little bit longer. I'm not sure if anyone else can. But yes, I'm going to stop the share now so that we can see each other again, because that was very nice to do. And I think, Sarah, have you got some questions that we can then sort of work through now?
Yes, there is a few. A lot of them have been answered already, which is great. Linda mentioned about a plant species list. which I know a few of you have said that you would like. Is that something that possibly could be sent to either Pippa or I, and we can have a look at it if Linda is still there? I don't know if she...
Andrew's already responded that they've got one, and probably Somerset Botany may have one as well. I wasn't clear about that. Great.
Okay. There's a question about linking up that I just wanted to clarify, because quite a few people have asked about that, in terms of publishing a list. We are working on it. It's very important to be getting some peer support together. I don't know how far Pippa's got with that.
I think ideally, so there's the issue of in us figuring out where you all are and sort of who wants to work with who. I guess that's part of the idea of the Wilder Churches Champions. You know, if people are happy to be a point of contact, then, you know, ideally it would be great to have a list on the webpage sort of saying this is where there are champions, these are other communities that are interested, and then people would then know that there were other people potentially in their community, and we can start to make these sort of physical links. It's one of the reasons in this sort of, when you booked on this time, we specifically asked you which church is it that you're interested in, which parish are you in, so that we could start to make a bit more sort of make up some of those links. We then have to, because of GDPR, we then need to ask each of you if you're happy to be told about each other and all of that, and that takes a little bit of time, but yeah, it's one of the ideas behind this, the sort of champions idea, in that it does sort of give a point of contact that people in the community can get in touch with. That's one of the key things, really. So so if you think you're up for doing that, it can be just that, you know, if you think then you'd like to sort of, you know, just be part of the group, that's fine. That would be one of the things that could be really useful for that. But we will try and sort of help you to make those links. And it was another reason we wanted to show the camera as well this time, so that people could see everybody else, but we will try and do that a bit more as we can. So yes, any further questions?
Great, thank you. Yeah, most of the questions appear to have been answered. I've just got, somebody's asked about ponds. I know that we'll be looking more specifically at those kind of features later on in one of our future sessions, so hang in there. Sorry, Pippa.
I can add to that. We
please do.
Somerset Wildlife Trust are running a pond creation workshops. It's something, some of the other work that I'm doing. So at the moment, if you're interested in pond creation, it's not about churchyards, but it's about pond creation. So we've got a fantastic expert from the reptile and amphibian conservation group for Somerset, from RAGS, who's going to be sharing everything there is to know about how to create a pond and how to make that a fantastic place for wildlife. So you can sign up to that on our website. But yes, things like actions for wildlife is something we're going to focus on the next session. I'm aware that it's the exciting bit in some ways, but it's important to have sort of developed the information we can now, which, you know, the best thing we can do now is really understand what we've got wildlife wise, and that means when we then talk about all those things, we'll already know what might work well for our churchyards. So
thank you. Another question for you, Pippa, just to clarify, somebody's asked about I think essentially sensitivity around graves, and that, I think, yeah, you might just like to sum up how people would go about pursuing that
in terms of sort of management of
yes.
grassland around graves. I mean, absolutely, yes. It's about as emotive a place as you can get in many ways, a churchyard, and graves are really a focus of that. So I think that's why I'm sort of saying it's so important to talk to people and understand how they feel about the churchyard and build that in. And there may be some churchyards where it just isn't going to work to let the flowers grow long, but sometimes it's about people realizing that by letting the flowers grow tall, you're still caring for the churchyard, and you're only letting them grow tall in the summer, and then it's mown again in the autumn and the winter. So it's either flowery or it's short, and it's a process. But I would say some churchyards, it might not be the right thing, and that's fine. There'll be lots of other things you can do for wildlife. It's really important that this is a good thing for your community. It's not about, you know, we don't want anyone to be upset or in any way sort of by this sort of initiative. It's about doing something that works for your community. So yes, please be sensitive, I suppose is what I say, and that's fine. That's perfectly valid. And in some places, I think it's, you know, if we've got used to one way that something is managed, it's sort of, then if we see a change, it can be unnerving. And again, it's why the communication is so key. It's why I've been so hesitant about saying, you know, the small test plot. only do it if you think that when people see that, they go, oh yes, I know why they're doing that. They're testing out where the flowers are, but I'm going to still have a chance to talk about that. And if I'm going to have a chance to say how I feel about this. And it's really important to listen to what people say to you and to take that on board, I would say. So yes. Great,
thank you. I'll just point to Jed's post about the open church in Brent Knoll. There's a fantastic opportunity there to sign up and go and have a look around their churchyard and their wonderful peach project. So I'm signed up to that, and I'm sincerely hoping that we're all allowed to do so by that point. And also Eileen, somebody's asked about whether or not people can visit Eileen. Is that an open invitation for tea in the churchyard there, Eileen? But yes, there is. I think Eileen's put an email in there. I can't find it now, but that would be fantastic. I think that's it for questions, actually, unless anyone's got anything else.
It is probably worth mentioning Ben's comment. We may not be able to pick this up tonight, but he says, can you reinforce the benefit of letting nature and time enhance these spaces rather than planting or sowing, in brackets, wildflowers? So obviously there is a thing where you can get plants and seeds that are wild, so-called, but he's suggesting really just letting them go. So I don't know if you want to respond to that now, but I think that was quite an important point to make.
No, I agree, David, and it's something that I think is so important. Sorry, Andrea, were you going to say something then, Andrea? Sorry.
No, it's okay. Doesn't matter. You're on.
No, I was just going. I would echo that. It's one of the reasons I keep saying, find out what you've got first. I think almost as humans, sometimes we want to do something. We think, oh, what can I do? How can I get these species here? And actually, in a lot of situations, they're already there. They're and that flora that remains in churchyards is so precious because it only remains in churchyards in many cases. It's been lost from so much else in the countryside because of the changes we've had in management practices. And so absolutely finding out what you've got already is really important. And if in time, you discover that you don't have that much diversity, then there might be the question as to, oh, do we try and introduce some seed? But again, it will be about understanding what you've currently got in order to know what seed to introduce and where you would introduce it and how you would do that. And the following sessions are going to be really sort of focused on that sort of taking action side of things. I've worked a lot in the past with recreating wildflower meadows, so that's something I can sort of share a lot of experience on in terms of where you get the seed from and how you use it. And I think it's really important that we look after what we've got. And yes, in many cases, there's no need to sow seed. And if you do, then we can give you lots of tips as to how to make sure the seed you're sowing is likely to take and is of the right provenance and is of the species that are most likely to be able to establish, because different species will establish with different soil conditions. And that's something that, again, the wildlife and the plants particularly will tell you. We'll be able to look at churchyards and look at the flora there, and it will tell us whether it's quite acidic or if it's a bit sort of more limestoney, more calcareous, and different plants grow in different places. And that's why this information gathering stage is so key, really. But no, it's a really important point. So thank you, David, for flagging that. Are there any questions that we've missed? Do we think, have we got there, do we think?
I think we'll leave it for tonight. I think there are a few, we've already agreed to contact certain people about very specific things as well. So, things, we'll come back more generally with a few of those points.
Can I just say a final thank you so much, everybody, for bearing with us. I'm sorry that it had the hiccup that it did, and obviously we will ensure that won't happen next time, but I really appreciate those of you may have joined late. All of this will have been recorded, so it will be possible to catch up again, and that will be on our website by next week at the latest. So but no, thank you so much for coming, and it's really lovely to see you all. It's much better being able to see you all, so thank you. Is there anything else to cover? Anyone else got any points? Sarah, did you want to say anything? Any final words? Or
no, thank you.
Thank you to Andrea. I must say thank you to Andrea, and thank you to Sarah, and thank you to Bryony, who helped so many of you join us when we had our hiccups. So thank you as well to her and to David and everyone, really. So thank you so much. Right.
Thank you.
Bye.